Deep in Louisiana Bayou country, where moss hangs heavy and wood smoke never quite leaves the air, grandmothers once fed whole families from what the swamp gave freely. Wild game, swamp greens, Gulf seafood, all stirred together with African wisdom, French technique, and native roots in one blackened cast iron pot. But the bayou changed. The young folks moved to the city. The old kitchens went quiet. In this episode, we'll revisit 25 suppers the crawfish kings still whisper about. And the last one on this list was so sacred, families buried the recipe before they'd share it with a stranger. 1. Crawfish étouffée. Every bayou kitchen's proudest Tuesday supper was crawfish étouffée, a peanut butter-colored roux stirred slow over a low fire. The holy trinity of onions, celery, and bell pepper cooked down until nearly sweet, crawfish tails smothered in until the gravy clung thick to every piece. Spooned heavy over long-grain white rice, it was the kind of supper that made you close your eyes on the first bite. Children caught those crawfish from roadside ditches after a good rain, free, in rubber boots, before sundown. Electric traps and commercial farms changed all that. It wasn't just a supper, it was the whole reason the family came home. But even this beloved staple was simple compared to the dish that could silence a table just by the way it smelled. 2. Maque choux. Every Cajun summer's smoky skillet centerpiece was maque choux, born the moment the season's first corn came in so fresh, you could hear it pop at the husk. She'd cut the kernels off the cob, then scrape the milky pulp with the dull side of the blade. That sweet corn milk was the whole secret. Into a heavy skillet with tomatoes, onions, and peppers, cooked in lard until everything caramelized at the edges. Some added shrimp. Some kept it plain and let the corn do all the talking. The dish traces its roots to the native peoples who taught early settlers what this land's summers could give. And the land gave generously. What came next took that same wisdom and hid it inside a backyard vine that most newcomers walked right past without knowing what it held. 3. Stuffed melitons. Every Acadian backyard's most generous secret was the meliton vine. Pale green, pear-shaped squash climbing freely over fences all over Cajun country. Families halved them, scooped the flesh, and mixed it with Gulf shrimp, seasoned breadcrumbs, onion, and garlic. Stuffed back into the shell and baked golden, they were church supper royalty, gone from the dish before the blessing was fully said. This was an Acadian heirloom hiding in plain sight, requiring nothing but a vine, a catch, and knowledge passed down by hand. As old homesteads sold off and yards shrank, the vines went with them. But if the meliton was the backyard's quiet treasure, the next dish was something you could hear from the road before you ever saw the smoke. 4. Boudin balls. But every autumn hog harvest's finest reward was boudin balls. Leftover rice and pork filling seasoned with cayenne and black pepper, rolled into rounds, breaded, and dropped into hot oil until the outside crackled and the inside remained steamy and soft. Children ran to the yard when the grease got hot. Neighbors appeared without being called. Fresh boudin balls eaten standing in somebody's driveway while the fat was still singing. That was Louisiana at its finest, no reservations required. The hog kill wasn't just butchery. It was the community's way of feeding itself, celebrating itself, and proving that nothing given freely needed to go to waste. What the hog harvest started, the next dish finished. But this one required hunting something far wilder than a pen-raised pig. 5. Rabbit jambalaya. Every Cajun cane field's wild contribution to the supper table was rabbit jambalaya. A morning's hunt turned into a feast for 6. The rabbit was brown dark, pulled out while the trinity cooked in the drippings, and dewy going in next with its smoky fat releasing into the pan. Then rice and broth simmering until every grain absorbed every bit of flavor. Wild rabbit gave jambalaya something a store-bought bird never could, a deep, gamey richness that tasted like the land itself. When the open fields disappeared, that wildness left the pot permanently. But hunting rabbit in a cane field at dawn was nothing compared to what the next cook was doing. Wading into dark bayou water before sunrise with a lantern and nothing but nerve. 6. Turtle sauce piquante. Every bayou elder's most patient dish was turtle sauce piquante, earned only by those willing to hunt snapping turtles by lantern light, wading into dark water before sunrise with a long-handled hook and the kind of nerve that cannot be taught. The old men who did it didn't talk much about it. They came home before daylight, and by noon the turtle meat, dense, slightly sweet, unlike anything else the bayou produced, was simmering slow in a spicy tomato gravy built on a dark roux. This wasn't just a recipe. It was a rite, passed from father to son beside the water in the dark, the kind of knowledge that only lives as long as someone chooses to carry it. And if hunting turtles in the dark sounds bold, what the next family was doing at the bayou's edge before dawn would have gotten them arrested by anyone who didn't understand why they had no choice. 7. Alligator sauce piquante. Every bayou family's most daring protein was alligator sauce piquante, gator tail, mild and slightly chewy like pork, taken quietly from bayou edges before dawn by families who needed to eat and knew how to provide. Into a dark roux gravy, it went with tomatoes, peppers, and enough cayenne to announce itself across the room, simmering until the gator surrendered and the gravy reduced into something worth sopping up with the last piece of bread. This was provision and courage on the same plate, the feeding of a family by the skill and nerve of the person who loved them most. But the before-dawn courage that put gator on the table was nothing compared to the sound that filled the bayou on spring nights, the one that told every family it was time to light the frogging lantern. 8. Frog legs, sauce piquante. Every spring, Bayou's midnight tradition was frog legs sauce piquante. Warm nights when the bullfrogs got loud enough to hear from the porch, and the frogging lanterns finally came out. Children held the light while the older folks worked the muddy bank. The legs were fried first in seasoned cornmeal until crisp, then laid into a peppery tomato sauce that softened them just slightly, without losing the crust underneath. This was a dish that required knowing your land, trusting the dark, and being willing to get your feet muddy for the people you fed. Frog populations have suffered from habitat loss across the South. The midnight trips grew less common, and this dish went with them. But if frogging pulled families to the water at midnight, the next dish pulled them from bed before the sky had any color, and what they came home carrying made every cold morning worth it. 9. Duck gumbo with andouille. Every wild teal season's greatest achievement was duck gumbo with andouille, the pot that justified the before-dawn hike through marsh grass, the cold hands, the long wait, and the walk home with enough birds to make the morning mean something. A dark roux cooked for 40 minutes of steady stirring until it turned nearly chocolate dark, and the kitchen smelled like a campfire and a bakery at once. Andouille, okra, rich broth, then the duck, which gave this gumbo a depth no grocery bird will ever replicate. Filet powder, ground sassafras leaves, a Choctaw contribution to this table, finished the pot. This gumbo was the whole bayou in one bowl: African roots, French roux, native filet, and whatever the Marsh gave up that morning. Yet even a wild duck gumbo couldn't match what the next family was making in the deep woods from an animal most people today wouldn't recognize as dinner. 10. Squirrel stew with cornmeal dumplings. Every backwoods Louisiana kitchen's most honest protein was squirrel stew, hunted by boys old enough to handle a .22, brought home without ceremony, simmered low until the meat fell from the small bones. The dumplings, cornmeal, flour, salt, and water, were dropped in by feel. No measuring cups needed, because the woman making them had done it enough times her hands already carried the knowledge. This was humble in the best possible way, the kind of dish that didn't reach for anything and somehow landed somewhere extraordinary every time. And while squirrel in the stew pot might raise an eyebrow, what the next family was slow roasting on a Sunday would raise something considerably stronger. But ask anyone who ate it growing up, and they'll stop you before you finish your objection. 11. Possum roast with sweet potatoes. Every rural Louisiana family's most misunderstood Sunday roast was slow-baked possum with sweet potatoes. Parboiled first, laid into a roasting pan with sweet potatoes and lard, slow roasted until the skin crisped and the fat ran down over everything below. Done right and done patient, the meat came out tender, rich, and slightly sweet from what it had been resting beside all afternoon. This dish carries the full weight of its history. Black families across the rural South making something genuinely celebratory from what the land offered freely, because dignity and real flavor were never things that required money to achieve. Very few people make it now. But while possum required patience and an open mind, the next dish required something else entirely: the willingness to look at what was destroying the bayou and decide to eat it instead. 12. Nutria chili. Every bayou family's most pragmatic pot was nutria chili. Swamp rat meat, lean and dark and close to rabbit in taste, browned with onions and garlic, then simmered with tomatoes, kidney beans, and enough cayenne from Mama's garden to make the whole table sit up straight. The nutria was introduced in the 1930s and has been devouring Louisiana's coastal marshes ever since. Families close to the water had a practical answer: put it in the pot. This was ecological wisdom and kitchen thrift combined. The Bayou community solving its own problems with a cast iron skillet and a heavy hand with the spice. For all its boldness, nutria chili needed a garden and a pot. The next dish needed a trot line, a dark bayou channel, and someone willing to check it before the sun came up. 13. Catfish coubillon. Every trot line fisherman's proudest morning pot was catfish coubillon, the overnight catch going straight to the stove before the dew burned off the grass. Louisiana's coubillon bore little resemblance to its French ancestor. A hearty roux-based stew, loud with tomatoes and okra. The catfish fillets laid in gently at the end so they could cook through without falling apart. A complete meal in one pot, built from that morning's haul. This was the Bayou feeding its people as directly and honestly as any dish ever cooked anywhere. Trotlining still happens in pockets of Louisiana, but the before-dawn ritual and that purposeful, unhurried rhythm belongs to a different kind of morning now. And if coubillon was built on patience, the next dish was built on something even older, the Louisiana art of smothering, which turned rabbit and thyme into something close to holy. 14. Smothered rabbit with gravy. Every Louisiana Sunday table's most tender achievement was smothered rabbit with gravy. Rabbit legs cooked low in a covered pot with onions that melted nearly to nothing, the gravy turning silky and dark brown over a long, unhurried hour. Served over stone-ground grits cooked until creamy and rich. This was Sunday dinner in a household where Sunday dinner was sacred. The rabbit came from the yard or the field. The grits came from the local mill. The gravy came from good technique and patience. And those three honest things together made one of the finest meals Louisiana ever put on a plate. But while smothered rabbit honored the whole animal, the next dish honored what most modern kitchens throw directly in the trash and turned it into something unforgettable. 15. Dirty rice with giblets. Every no-waste Louisiana kitchen's most misunderstood masterpiece was dirty rice. White rice cooked with brown chicken liver, ground meat, garlic, green onion, and black pepper, until the pot went speckled, dark, and impossibly savory. The giblets, heart, gizzards, liver, the parts the package hides, added a mineral richness no other cut of meat can replicate. This was the ultimate no-waste supper, a philosophy worn as a badge of honor, proof that the cook who wasted nothing fed her family the best. As whole birds gave way to boneless packages and giblets disappeared, this masterpiece went right along with them. And if dirty rice proved the discarded parts were actually the finest, the next dish proved that the garden vegetable others rushed past could feed a whole family on its own. 16. Okra smut. Every Bayou garden's most underestimated supper was okra smut. Fresh okra sliced and stewed low with tomatoes, onions, and shrimp, until everything broke down into a thick, savory mass that made no apologies for its texture and needed none at all. The okra's natural thickening did in 20 minutes what a root takes an hour to achieve, and the shrimp brought a sweetness the vegetables couldn't reach alone. Served over rice, eaten with cornbread, ladled into whatever vessel was nearby. This was pure Bayou comfort, born from the backyard garden, flavored by the coast, and served to whoever showed up hungry without a single question asked. But while okra smut came from the garden, the next dish came straight from the Gulf, and the women who made it did something with a raw shrimp that no restaurant has ever fully replicated. 17. Stuffed shrimp. Every Gulfside family's proudest platter was stuffed shrimp. Big Gulf shrimp butterflied open, packed tight with seasoned crab meat, breadcrumbs, and green onion, baked golden until the filling set and the whole house smelled like the coast on a good day. The women who made these had the filling balanced purely by memory. Not too wet, not too dry. Seasoned precisely right. The way you only know things when you've made them 100 times. This looked like fine dining and cost a fraction of it, because Gulf seafood was once so abundant that working families ate it on ordinary Tuesdays without giving the price a thought. But if stuffed shrimp was the Gulf's finest gift, the next dish was the hog kill's greatest achievement, and it required two separate preparations happening at the same time in the same yard. 18. Boudin links with cracklins. Every hog kill's most anticipated double reward was boudin links with cracklins, sausage made from pork meat, liver, cooked rice, green onion, and cayenne simmered until just firm. Eaten beside skin and fat, fried in a cauldron until they puffed and shattered between the teeth, with a richness almost too much for one person at once. Eaten standing in the yard where the morning's work had been done, this was a reward, a celebration, and a community's proof that it could provide for itself from one animal, wasting absolutely nothing. The hog kills are mostly history now, and while boudin and cracklins came from the hog, the next dish came from smoke itself. One cured cut of pork that seasoned an entire pot without trying. 19. Tasso ham gravy over grits. A Bayou breakfast fire's most aromatic achievement was tasso ham gravy over grits. Smoky cured pork shoulder rubbed with cayenne, garlic, and black pepper, smoked until nearly mahogany, sliced thin so its fat could render and build a gravy thick enough to pour slow over stone-ground grits that had been cooking since the fire was lit. One small piece of tasso carried the seasoning work of 5 ingredients, a single cured cut doing what other kitchens needed an entire spice rack to achieve. Good tasso is still made, but stone-ground grits are harder to find, and this combination over a wood fire, the way it was always meant, is very nearly gone. But if tasso over grits was the Bayou's finest breakfast, the next dish was what the whole neighborhood brought to church on Sunday, and nobody went home without asking for the recipe. 20. Melliton casserole with seafood. Every church supper's most requested dish was melliton casserole with seafood. Chayote squash layered with Gulf shrimp and sometimes crab meat, bound with seasoned breadcrumbs and finished with a golden crust that filled the house with a smell that stopped conversations mid-sentence. Carried cross town in a covered dish on someone's lap, it arrived at the fellowship hall already beloved before the lid came off. This was communal food at its most honest. It required a garden, a fresh catch, a little time, and a reason to feed a crowd, which in Bayou country was never hard to find. And if the casserole was the church supper's queen, the next dish was the Bayou cook's most playful invention, one that borrowed its name from the very boats that worked these waters. 21. Eggplant Piro. A Bayou cook's most inventive creation was the eggplant piro, a hollowed fried eggplant shell named for the flat-bottomed canoe that worked Louisiana's shallow waterways for generations, filled with shrimp creole cooked down bold and fragrant until it smelled like the Gulf Coast itself. The crispy shell softened just slightly from the heat of the filling, layering crunch against tender vegetable against rich seafood in every bite. Someone invented this from abundance, imagination, and maybe a little humor, and it became a Bayou classic, not because it tried to impress anyone, but because it worked perfectly every time. Few restaurants make it now. Few home cooks under 60 remember how. While the piro was born from creativity, the next dish was born from pure necessity, made from whatever the coast gave in surplus, eaten standing on the porch before the sun went all the way down. 22. Shrimp or oyster patties. Every porch supper's most satisfying quick plate was shrimp or oyster patties, ground Gulf seafood mixed with mashed potato, Creole seasoning, and egg, fried flat in cast iron until both sides went deeply golden and the edges crisp just right. Eaten standing outside on warm Louisiana evenings with nothing but a bottle of hot sauce and a slice of white bread, the sky going orange over the tree line. The oyster version carried a briny sweetness unlike anything else the coast produced, the kind of flavor that made people stop talking and just eat, which in Louisiana is the highest possible compliment. But if the oyster patty was the coast's evening gift, the next dish was the Creole city's morning ritual, started before dawn, finished before the rest of the world opened its eyes. 23. Grillades and grits. Every Creole kitchen's most purposeful dawn meal was grillades and grits, thin rounds of beef round steak pounded flat, browned hard in cast iron until a dark crust built, then braised long in tomato gravy with onions, garlic, and bell pepper, until the meat was tender enough to cut with the side of a fork, served over grits that had been going since the fire was first lit. You started it early, because the dish demanded it, because feeding your family a proper warm breakfast was the first and most important act of the whole day, and no one who made grillades ever questioned that priority. Grillades still appear on New Orleans brunch menus. The version made at home before daylight, with that quiet purpose, is rarer than it deserves to be. And while grillades required an early fire, the next dish required something rarer. Bread so stale it had been given up for lost, saved overnight by a cook who believed nothing in her kitchen deserved to be wasted. 24. Pan pandu with cane syrup. A Bayou kitchen's most redemptive breakfast was pandu with cane syrup. Stale bread soaked overnight in eggs, cream, and vanilla until every drop of custard was absorbed. Fried in real butter until the outside caramelized golden and the inside stayed rich all the way through. Louisiana's version predates American French toast and has always taken the soaking far more seriously. And it required cane syrup, steens, dark and thick and molasses forward, poured over while the butter still sizzled in the pan. In a kitchen where nothing was wasted, the fact that yesterday's lost bread had become this morning's most requested breakfast felt like a small daily miracle, and it was one that happened every single time. But pandu saved yesterday's bread. The final dish on this list saves something far harder to hold on to. And this is the one the old crawfish kings still won't talk about freely. 25. Gateau de sirop. Every Bayou family's most closely guarded sweet was gateau de sirop, a dark, dense sorghum cake carried to every gathering wrapped in cloth, smelling of cane syrup and warm spice, and something older than the recipe itself. Not sweet in the way modern desserts perform sweetness, but complex and slightly bitter and satisfying in a way that stays with you long after the plate is empty. Cut in squares, eaten without frosting, shared only with people trusted enough to receive it. In Bayou country, cane syrup was as fundamental to baking as flour, and this cake was how a community said that its roots ran deeper than any flood, any hardship, any generation that tried to leave the old ways behind. Sorghum production in Louisiana has fallen sharply, and the families still making this cake are holding on to something the Bayou should always be remembered for. A recipe never written down, because it was never meant to leave the kitchen. This is the sweet the crawfish kings still whisper about, not because it was the richest or the wildest, but because it tasted exactly like home, and home, in the Louisiana Bayou, was always worth fighting to remember. These 25 suppers didn't disappear for lack of flavor. They slipped quietly into memory, like mist on the bayou at dawn, still whispered about by those who remember what a real table used to taste like. They faded because the world moved fast and forgot to look back. The trot lines came up empty, the hog kills stopped, the meluton vines were paved over, the wood fires went cold. But that food, that wild, soulful, one-pot bayou magic rooted in African hands and French fire and native earth, it still lives in the people who carry it. So if you know one of these dishes, cook it. If you knew someone who made it, call them before that knowledge is gone for good. Drop the dish you remember most in the comments, because these flavors deserve to come home.